Hi, I am Dr. Kim Sage. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. Welcome to my YouTube channel and to this series, which is actually part of a larger series called Wildly Loved, where we're diving into childhood and our trauma brains and our relationships and our attachment wounds and trying to understand, as a result of what happened to us in childhood, where we struggle today. If you're new here, please consider subscribing and checking that little box where the bell is, and that way you'll get notified when I post new videos. I'm posting Monday through Friday right now in this series, and so I really am glad you're here joining me. And really quickly, I have 3 courses. You can check out the links down below. One is a free course on identifying what happened to you in childhood. And then this is a workbook from the course that is provided called Remothering. It's about how to really learn to heal that inner child and inner parent. The course is full of information and exercises and everything you want to know about how to heal yourself, and also comes with meditations and affirmations and lots of videos. And so I hope you'll check that course out. And then really my flagship course, which is called Borderline and Narcissistic Parents, Healing and Dealing with Your Trauma. I believe there are 75 lessons in the online course, but same thing, just really full of everything you could really ever want to know about if you had a parent who you believe was somewhere on the spectrum of very emotionally immature all the way up to maybe undiagnosed borderline or narcissistic types of disorders. So please check those out. So this week we're talking about how these experiences in childhood really kind of live in our bodies and our relationships and lives. And so today's video is about the 8 top triggers as a result of having toxic parents. And so we're just going to talk about what that looks like for us. Remember that these kind of parents set up a pattern, right? So all parents have, lots of periods of imperfection and they make mistakes. But when we're talking about parents who repeatedly were emotionally neglectful or intense or wounding or unsafe, time and time again, or they were enabled and allowed to be by the other parent who couldn't or wouldn't protect you in some way, we start to believe and live in this world where this is just how our mind sees the world, right? This is the map. This is the attachment pattern. This is what we can expect of relationships and ourselves. And so these 8 things, I think, can really trigger us back into our childhood trauma, especially around wounding parents. So, number 1, feeling like we're being judged inaccurately and negatively. So if we feel like someone is making an assessment of our character that we really don't feel is true, that can be extremely hurtful, right? It's that part of us that is very sensitive to being told in childhood, like we were, that we were bad, that we should be ashamed, or that we weren't perfect in some way. And so any kind of assessment of our character, when maybe it's just feedback, but if it feels like we are being judged, that is deeply, deeply triggering for us. And we can definitely kind of collapse into those trauma type responses, right? Number 2, feeling like we made a mistake. Because so many of us use perfectionism and that inner critic to get in front of making sure we paid attention to the tone of voice or the patterns with a parent, or being good because we really got love when we were the good child or the golden child, or when we were reflecting that parent's value, or when we were emotionally taking care of them. If we did something wrong or made a mistake, that was dangerous for us. And so we can be very sensitive to making mistakes. And so that can be a trigger, also collapsing into our feeling unworthy and not good enough, and often, depressed or anxious or wounded. Number 3, not being allowed to speak our minds for fear of retribution. So feeling like your feelings are bad, and that includes even self-advocating. So you are not allowed to speak your mind. So when you feel like, I cannot say what I need in this relationship, in this meeting, in this dynamic, that can often make us feel trapped again back into childhood, where we couldn't ever say what we wanted because there would be a hell to pay and a price to pay. Except for that may not be the case. We may be sitting in a meeting where we feel like we're not supposed to say something, but it's taking us all the way back in time to that child self, that little inner child inside that says, oh no, don't say what you really think or feel, because you might be shunned or shamed for it. Number 4, when we feel lonely, feeling very isolated and lonely is often a trigger back to childhood, because many of us spent a lot of time physically alone, internally alone, feeling like people weren't safe, and so we often regulated ourselves. That's often that state of dreamy auto-regulation we can see in like certain types of attachment, especially in avoidant. And so there's a sense that loneliness, though, even though we all can feel lonely at times or alone, it can really take us back to childhood. And so we're assessing, let's say, this day when I'm feeling lonely as like my entire life is lonely. Well, maybe it's just this day or this week, but it takes us and transports us kind of back in time. Number 5, we need to set a boundary, but we feel like we can't. That is often something that feels really triggering, because oftentimes in many childhoods that are unsafe emotionally, boundaries were violated, there were no boundaries, they weren't respected, you couldn't have them, you couldn't set them, or they were extremely rigid in the parent's favor, and so they didn't really involve you at all, you had no say in things. And so that can really feel, once again, like being taken back into childhood, where we just feel out of control and trapped, and that we can't say or create a situation that advocates for what we need. And that could be our time, our bodies, our finances, whatever it is, that can feel very triggering. Number 6, anger in other people and even in ourselves. So first of all, anger in someone else can be very, very triggering. Now, it might just be annoyance or irritation, and it might go all the way up to rage. But on any of those spectrums, and they often can intensify, anything that feels like anger, because especially with parents who have untreated and undiagnosed or some form of BPD or NPD, both tend to have an issue with anger, with walking on eggshell kind of anger, with anger that seems to come out of nowhere. Or it can be that quiet, repressed, internalized rage that they have kind of like seething under the surface, but we know that a parent was like that. And they were very passive aggressive or indirectly, just always expressing their displeasure. And that can feel really triggering when someone else is angry with us, and even the actual feeling of anger in ourselves. Because in so many of our childhoods, we were not allowed to have anger. We had to go to our rooms or go leave, or we were punished for being angry. And so we don't know how to do that. And also because for us, anger, as I always say, anger equals danger for so many of us, right? Conflict was unsafe. Number 7, feeling rejected. And that kind of goes back to being misjudged or making mistakes. But when we don't get chosen for something, right? A job, a relationship, a team, these things happen. They're part of life. But for many of us, we felt so deeply rejected by parents who had these really profound patterns of wounding behaviors and language and dynamics, that just not being wanted can be very deeply triggering, can very much take us back in time to places where we feel, once again, shame-filled, worthless, unlovable. That kind of goes back to that I am bad I talk a lot about. And lastly, number 8, feeling happy. I think this is an interesting one, but it's very true that for many of us, we just believe at our core that bad things will always happen. And so we can't let ourselves feel real amounts of joy or happiness. And when we do, it's like we're watching for okay, but there'll be a price to pay for this. Something will come next. Because in so many homes where, like I'm saying, anger or criticism or control or neglect, it just always meant that your ability to trust in what was coming next was often didn't exist, right? You just were always finding yourself feeling lonely, isolated, rejected, controlled, criticized, emotionally scared or unsafe. And so when you feel that kind of sense of happiness and joy, it's like you don't trust it, right? So that can be very triggering. So you actually deprive yourself of feeling success and joy and a sense of happiness or peace or accomplishment, because your body, your nervous system is like, remember childhood where bad things happen? You need to stay hypervigilant and don't let yourself feel that too much, because you need to be prepared for what's going to come next. So those are what I think are the top 8 triggers of having more toxic parents in your childhood. Please feel free to add more. I know there are more. I was trying to keep them somewhat reasonable, but I so appreciate your comments and thoughts and your stories that you share. And other people really do too. You'd be amazed at things people send me when they say, I read this other thing and it really validated my own story. Or when you talked about it, I thought it was just me. And so I really do believe that the more we share these stories, especially in these really complicated childhoods where, like I always say, it wasn't always bad, but when it was bad, it was really bad, we can feel very lonely and isolated in our struggle. So I do believe that community is a way to heal. So thank you so much for being part of this community. I'm so grateful you're here, and I will look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Take care and stay safe. Bye, guys.